Hi everyone, it's Sarge here with Spooner Physical Therapy, coming to you from our beautifully renovated location in Scottsdale, just one of 22 clinics we have valley-wide. I want to talk to you today a little bit about my specialty. My specialty involves how the spine sits on the pelvis, so posture. And I apply this to walking gait mechanics, and I also apply it to running gait mechanics. When it comes to posture, it's all about symmetry, and we're talking about symmetry through the pelvis and equal pressure through the feet. Since posture starts down at the foot, we want to take an in-depth look at what the foot and ankle are doing for the rest of the body. And when I talk about symmetry again, I want to make sure that I have even weight pushed through my first and fifth metatarsals as well as my heel, my calcaneus. If you can put enough pressure through all three of those spots, your pelvis is going to tend to sit nice and level. If all three of those points can share your weight, you're much likely to have a level pelvis when you're standing. If you put too much pressure on the balls of your foot, the pelvis forward, and if you put too much pressure through the heels, you tend to go backward here. So talking about posture, it varies person to person, but I'm going to share with you a few tips that I find the most helpful. And we're talking about symmetry of the pelvis and pelvic position. When my pelvis is positioned level, my sacrum has a nice tabletop for the spine to sit on, and this affects the entire spine. If my sacrum or my table starts to tilt too far forward, I have to compensate. And the same thing goes if my pelvis and my sacrum tip too far back. The compensation starts in the lumbar spine and eventually affects everything into the cervical spine or the neck. When we talk about how we can influence the pelvic position, we can either do an anterior tilt or a posterior tilt to find where our sweet spot is, or nice and level. Again, starts at the feet. If I put pressure through the balls of my toes, typically I'm going to be tilting my pelvis forward. We see it a lot in high heel wearers. And what happens when that pelvis tips forward? The sacrum is going to tip forward. Now, in order to stand upright, I'm going to have to overarch that low back. The overarching of that low back can cause facet joint pain, or these little joints in the spine irritated, eventually closing off the rest of the nerves as they come out, these little holes of the spine. And those nerves all the way down into the back. Conversely, if I'm back on my heels a lot and I tend to slump forward when I'm standing, my tabletop is now going sitting backward, and that table is now going to allow the spine to fall back down this way. In order to compensate and stand upright, I have to forward flex a lot, putting a lot of pressure through the discs and the front bodies of the vertebrae. Irritation will occur, stenosis, osteoarthritis, DJD or DDD, and subsequent pain, radiation down into the lower extremities. So the next plane of motion I want to discuss is the frontal plane. So the left to right in as far as the pelvis is concerned. Again, the pelvis is that nice tabletop which the rest of our spine sits on. I'll need to unweight my feet often, and a lot of times people resort to sinking down one hip or the other. That can cause some compression in the lumbar spine, and it's a good example. Here's my tabletop, and as I unweight my spine, I'm going to lift the right side, and in order to stand up straight, I'm going to arch my body a lot on the right side, and that arching is going to cause pain and irritation on that right side. Now, if I put pressure too long on the left side, the opposite occurs. So you can see what happens as the spine closes down on that side, and when it starts closing down so much that it causes the nerves to get irritated as they exit the spine into the lower leg. So yes, you want to unweight your feet every now and then, but try to get back into a nice symmetrical level pelvis. That way the spine's not dipping left to right. So when it comes to posture everywhere else above the chain, we talked about the foot and ankle and how pressure can affect the pelvis, but also the hips. When we talk about Being relaxed and standing with a slouch, my hips tend to allow my legs to dive down and in. This can cause the arch to fall, collapse, plantar fasciitis, etc. So I like to keep my feet shoulder width apart. Shoulder width apart is going to allow me to not put too much strain on my lateral hips. Lateral hips going left and right can cause bursitis, and especially if you're unloading one side versus the other. A lot of strain comes through the lateral hip, and we talked about tension and pressure on the lumbar spine. My head, I want to keep my head in line with my shoulders, shoulders slightly down and back. Try not to force it. The muscles will fatigue. I want you to get into a nice, natural standing posture. Again, knees slightly bent, head in line with the shoulders, shoulders in line with the pelvis. Pelvis slightly behind the knees that they're unlocked, and equal pressure through the feet. You also have to be aware of your walking posture. Again, it starts at the foot. When I hit the ground, typically I hit with my outer heel. If I'm taking too long of a stride, I'm going to tend to hit that outer heel and bring my knee too far in. It's like doing a series of mini lunges, and we all know lunges suck. So what I like to do when I'm walking is just shorten my stride a bit. Not a whole lot, just enough that my heel touches down briefly, and then I roll onto my foot. Making sure that my feet are hip width apart is another important aspect of walking. When I'm walking and I have my narrow base of support, such as a narrow stance here, I'm more likely to go deep into pronation. And with overpronation comes plantar fasciitis, collapsed arch, and a whole host of events up the chain, such as medial knee pain. So I want to make sure I'm supported. I'm walking hip width apart. That doesn't allow for a whole lot of this frontal plane motion, which can cause irritation all through the chain here. When we talk about how the pelvis should be moving, the pelvis should be rotating. Walking is very rotational. There's a lot of mechanisms built into rotation. The first one is when and my foot goes into pronation. That's a natural reaction, and we want that to wind up our external rotators of our glutes. But once I hit the ground, if my foot fails to come out of pronation and fails to supinate, I'm going to have medial knee pain, collapsed arch, plantar fasciitis, or even tendinitis of the first metatarsal and leading to bunion. So when I'm walking, I want to make sure that rotation is pulling me from this pronated foot into a nice stable foot. And that largely depends on the success of the pelvis coming around the corner.